been in this discussion for a while. To give an initial reaction.
My initial reaction, much as I loved the idea you were going to look at mindset, I find the project too focused on teaching and not enough on learning. So if you go back to the premise of the teachers who were showing the rich repertoire in South Australia, they were designers of learning. And learning was the basis from which everything flowed as to how I teach is driven by my desire to enable this sort of learning. And so I feel this is very teacher heavy, and I've got a concern about that. And if you really want to bring about change in the schooling, so I don't think schools are dead in Australia. I think we are actually well on the way to transforming them, but it takes teacher thinking, teacher thought for designing for learning is going to be the key. So my encouragement is to bring more learning into it.
How would you do that?
Getting teachers thinking about their work. I mean, that's really what my work's been for 30 years. It's been about asking them, well, what's a really weird thing is that there's a disconnect between their own personal theories of learning and what worked for them as learners, and how what they're picking up in a lot of theory. You know what I mean? So they don't question it, and that's partly because in the past the expert was the one who knew, and as a beginning teacher or an educator, you learn what the theorists say. I can remember getting a response on one of my assignments when I was doing my DPed saying, we don't want to know what you think, we want to know what Plato thinks. And I think, well, hang on, Plato was a long time ago, and even though I've got a lot of good ideas from Plato, the key thing I was trying to do was be very deeply thoughtful about what I was trying to do as an educator, but the response was, the answer lies in the theorist's head, in the expert's head, not in your head. And I think because of that past, we have a generation of teachers who do not think about learning as the base thing from which they then design. And that's where my big issue is.
I share your concern that it's too much about teaching and not enough about learning. And but I end up in a somewhat different place. First of all, I don't think schooling is dead. I think it's immortal. I think the post office demonstrates that highly institutionalized organizations will survive. And for me, the signal that there are some forms of social organization that will continue to exist way beyond their functional value to society is when the U.S. Postal Service delivered my Amazon package. Right? So now they're working for Amazon.
With a drone?
Soon.
Soon.
Except Amazon will own the drone, not the Postal Service. So I don't worry about the schooling sector. It's immortal. I think learning will evacuate. And the learning sector is going to be the most vibrant, interesting, and powerful part of society. And so to conflate learning and schooling is, I think, a huge conceptual error. I'm also confused about what's actually on the vertical axis, but I think you deserve enormous credit for having a go at it. I think it's very cool and provocative way to present this. I want to say, though, I want to repeat, there's a huge literature now on how forms of organization are being transformed in society, and how the nature of expert knowledge and professionalism is being transformed by digital culture. How do we get to the point where we, sitting here, can assume that education is somehow exempt from this massive transformation that's taking place in society? It just does not make sense to me. The way it's going to happen is schools aren't going to go away. It's that learning has already left. And it's now everywhere, right? So it's just a matter of time. The way I do this for my students is, because of the way it's organized industrially, schooling sector will improve in the linear fashion for all the reasons you just described. What's happening in society at large is because of the value of learning and the transformation of society is that learning is going to increase exponentially. So this gap between the linear and the exponential is going to get greater and greater and greater. We're just now beginning to see that gap develop. There are massive social issues associated with that, not the least of which is equity. We have to get out ahead of that. I don't think the schooling sector is nimble enough to actually face that problem by itself, but I do think that we might play a role in that. So I feel like we're living in people who are interested in education are living in a parallel universe. We think the world is going to transform itself according to the patterns that we're used to, or that we project based on our understanding of how this highly institutionalized environment works, when in fact the social function called learning has already left. And the question is, what is going to be our posture if you stay in the education sector? I've lost interest in that because I spent 15 years, 4,000 classrooms, 350 schools in a clinical practice trying to transform classroom instruction, right? I give up, right? I only have so many years left. I want to go where the learning is because I think that's what's exciting. I ask my students, do you want to work for the post office or do you want to transform learning? That's your existential choice.
Post office or Amazon? That's the choice. John, do you want to answer that, or will we come back to you? Okay. Anybody want to respond to anything you've heard so far? This is pretty fundamental to our project.
I suppose, just in responding to the focus on teachers, one of the biggest problems I see is that teachers are barriers to learning. And so they're preventing this digital learning. I mean, this is a gross generalisation because many aren't. But so I see the teachers as if not the problem, certainly they can be the barrier to the form of learning that you're talking about, which is why I think we need to focus on teachers. Now, you've just given up. What do we do? The other thing, I gave a couple of workshops. I did a couple of workshops at the Association for Learning Environments yesterday, and I said, look, I co-wrote with Claire and others a 5-day course for the Basco Institute for Educational Leadership on leading learning design. Oh, it was a space design, actually. There were 16 courses, one of them was learning. I look on the website now, there's hundreds of courses, 0 on space. So, and I mean, so that's an institutionalised, and yet, conversely, the government, the Victorian government, I think, is putting in $1 billion new into school design. I mean, how does this work? So I've almost given up, but...
I haven't given up. I think learning is the most exciting thing that's going on, and I'm all in for learning.
How do we take the teachers towards that learning project?
That's the point I was making before. It's not about. I'm not complaining about the project being too much about teachers.
Okay. Right,
I'm saying teaching.
Okay.
And so I absolutely agree. Working with teachers to help them deeply understand learning and develop their epistemic knowledge is really key. And then designing from that place.
I want to say, though, that teachers are taking the rap for a highly dysfunctional institutional structure. We're blaming them for selecting themselves rationally into an environment that they regard as safe and predictable, which is totally rational human behavior, right? So your data on the distribution of teaching practice totally confirms why these institutionalized organizations exist, which is people go there because they want to be there. And we're asking them to live in a space they, for the most part, do not want to live in, right?
So perhaps let's move the conversation a little bit from the general, which is really important to get to the particular. We have a number of schools represented here, including principals of schools, deputy principals of schools. A fairly provocative statement, teachers are barriers to learning. Ken's going to be the one to wear that one. Is this actually the case? What do you think?
I disagree. I think if we look at change over time, Lim and Zhao talk about digital technology as being an intruder onto the system of schooling. Tyack and Tobin talk about the grammar of schooling, that there are a set of rules that John spoke about, that the rules of schools actually dominate change. And if we look at spaces per se, space is the system, and then the system pushes back against the change. And that's what we've found at our school. We're a very traditional school, but what we've actually focused on, and this is where I disagree with Ken, is that rather than imposing change on our teachers, we've actually championed change through actually bottom-up innovation, where the teachers have been the focus of the intervention. We've used a change in space to realign the deck chairs to, and that's what you've said at various times of our work, is that we've realigned the deck chairs. We really haven't changed the nature of schooling in our institution, but what we're finding is that we are undoing 120 years of what schooling looks like at our school. And as a consequence, what we've been able to do within our projects is, because the teachers are the focus of the change, where we actually get in and follow the teacher for a significant period of time, support them through the change, get them to, as Julia said, understand their practice, understand exactly what they do, understand how their practice then affects their students, and we report back to them. I think that the big thing for us is that we're changing a very traditional system. We've found that if you impose change, and that if we look at the DER, the BER, they're all examples of imposed change from the top down. They haven't worked because they're an invader into the system. What we've sort of focused on as well, the bottom up, focus on the teacher to elicit the change, because ultimately they are the gatekeeper, and that's what Ken is saying. They are the gatekeeper of change. If you do not change the gatekeeper, well, you can invest all you want in a really fancy pants building, or you could get the best technology in the world, but if you don't actually get into the heart of the gatekeeper and actually change their mindset, actually look at how their mindset affects their practice, and then question it, but then support them through the process, well, it's a moot point really, isn't it? Is that fair or unfair?
Just a quick... back to Woodley School, gentlemen.
We've found that we've had most success where we've gone outside the conventional curriculum space and given our teachers license to do learning through activities and camps programs, where we've stepped away from being able to say that we have an assessment framework around that or a defined curriculum to deliver. And it's really been saying, find a passion, deliver that with a group of students who are excited about that learning with you. And that has given us the ability to develop a new pedagogy, which our hope now, or our challenge, is really to translate what are the elements of that new pedagogy that's come through those programs that have emerged without the constraints of a curriculum, and how do we bring those elements back into redefine or redeliver the core. And indeed, we're now at the point of going, well, is there a new core altogether? Because this Australian curriculum that is there is the stuff that is inhibiting us. So that, and just that whole notion that we're locked into sequential vertical progression of all kids moving through at the same time is a big challenge for us as well. And where our activities and camps programs are working best is because they're vertically integrated. And so we've got interest groups and ability groups operating as opposed to age level progression.
What about ASMS? Have you got a response to that?
I think my main question, I suppose, or comment would be around the students' role in the research. We're talking about teaching, and I'd like to see that the students weren't only one of the subjects of the research, but they're actually somehow or other involved in the research with a significant role. I mean, they're the ones that are experiencing the learning. They're the ones that are deserting schools. I think it's really important for us to think about how we might be able to connect with them in a meaningful way. And that's, I think, for us, about the scaling up. You know, like we're talking about what our students, where our students will choose to learn. And if they're choosing to learn in schools that are doing things that meet their needs and interests, enable them to be challenged and learn in a way that they find rewarding and satisfying, then I think the systems will take notice of that.
systems. Pat, do you mind me putting you on the spot and come from a sort of systems perspective?
Yes, I do mind putting you on spot, but that's okay. From a system perspective, I mean, we're a Catholic system in Western Sydney. We have 78 schools. We have billions of dollars invested in buildings that are probably very traditional in their setup and makeup and so on. But we're also building new schools, and which is why we're so interested in this, around what sort of spaces can be combined with pedagogy and teacher mind frames around making change. So that's why we come to this, because we're very interested in, well, we do have existing buildings, but if things can be proven that in new schools and with good recruitment and people in place with certain mind frames, then we're keen to see how that curriculum can be enacted. We're a little bit inhibited by, and if there's New South Wales people in the room, please support me or shoot me. BOSTES is the Board of Studies Teaching and Educational Standards. Hate them. Thank you. One of the biggest, talking about hurdles and so on, are one of the biggest problems that we deal with. We, in New South Wales, as everyone does, I mean, you have an Australian curriculum, but in New South Wales we have the New South Wales version of the Australian curriculum. The straitjacket. Which adds its own dimensions and accountabilities around what happens in schools, and there's compliance and all sorts of registration and accountabilities around that are making the change that we're looking for very difficult to happen. I was at a meeting recently where somebody asked a really good question, and somebody just alluded to it just before. Why are the interesting things all happening outside of classrooms? Why do you have projects and why do you have clubs at schools? Well, it's because the curriculum that's happening in the classroom is so bloody boring that the kids just dive on anything that's outside of that and really interesting. So I thought it was a great question. I think those are the sorts of questions that we need to come up with answers for. And I like Richard's idea around design and going with the play concept, and that's what we're going to explore in our new schools.
Can I pick up on that too, Wes? I think, Richard, you make a wonderful point, which, we've talked about before, and that being that, it's really about developing new social systems. I think you've just alluded to that yourself, Pat, and, referencing, Dewey's, democratic education work of, a century ago. That was really what he was on about too, and I think there's a lot to learn there. But importantly, I think also he talks about the role of the teacher as still being very, very central, but it's a different role. It's a role of sculpting and ensuring that that learning's taking place, and that some of the choices and opportunities that are available have productive outcomes, even within a democratic structure.
I've got another word there, curating.
Curating.
That comes to mind.
Yeah, so I think the focus of the project on teachers is still very appropriate in that context.
John. Oh, sorry, yeah, Richard. I'm actually secretly keeping John as the wrapper-up.
Oh, okay.
I see his brain ticking over this, and as the CI in charge of this sort of component of it.
I don't want to sound like some kind of bomb thrower. One of my gifts now that I'm free of teaching, and when you're on the faculty at Harvard, you do teach. It's one of the things about the institution that I really respect. So now that I'm not teaching, I get lots of time, and I've decided to spend it exploring the edges of learning practice. And I gave a talk about this earlier in the week, and one of the things that comes through to me as I look at these incredibly powerful learning practices, tutorial model in 9,000 schools in Mexico, which is deliberately designed to address the Sugata Mitra problem, which is how do you provide high quality learning in the absence of any possibility of a high-quality teaching force. And this small army of architects who created this studio model in Cambridge. And they're very different in many ways, but they have at least one thing in common, which is they have very straightforward, very transparent learning theories that everybody can understand equally well. Students and adults can tell you in identical language what the learning theory is. Point number one. Point number two is they break rules. And they break fundamental rules. So I'll just give you one example from NewView, which is the design studio. They have an ironclad rule, because it's a problem-based learning environment, that the only problems worth addressing are ones in which the adults don't know any more about the solutions than the kids do.
Sounds like a really good visual art classroom. Leanne, what do you think?
I suppose in my role looking at learning and teaching from a system level, I think they're not to underestimate the change there has been for teachers. Once upon a time, good teachers were those who had very well planned and structured programs and lessons that delivered those programs and lessons without actually focusing on the impact or the outcomes of those. I think there has been a significant change in the expectation that teachers own the outcomes of their students, and I think part of the danger of sort of saying the curriculum's the problem is that, you know, if we go back to a bad tradesman always blames their tools, I think the Australian curriculum through the general capabilities has everything we need in teaching and learning to actually address some of the issues about engaging students more fully in their learning. I think we underestimate the capacity for teachers to make decisions on a daily basis within their classrooms and in collaboration with other teachers about what best drives learning outcomes for students. And I think the deep understanding that the choices you make on a daily basis for teachers is what creates the impact. But the focus now on saying, well, what's the evidence base? And so my interest in this is what's the evidence base that we're going to gather around what we should be doing. In the ACT, since the 70s, we've been building open plan classrooms and schools. We've got a variety of designs there going on. I still think the driver is around good pedagogy and understanding what the teaching looks like in terms of its impact on the students for the outcomes is what interests me in this, because if we can work out how to use spaces better, how to engage students, how to embrace the changes in technology and the changes in interests of students and capacity of students to learn beyond classrooms and leverage off those things, that's what my interest is in this project, and how do we actually develop an evidence base through it around what the good practice is that actually achieves the impact and the outcomes, because I believe that teachers do want to do it better. Absolutely. That's the nature of the conversations and collaborations now.
Julie, you're biting something back there. Go for it.
What I'm concerned about is focus on practice. And the reason for that is that we in education have been on what I call the guru loop for a long time. Some guru's got another strategy or a practice. Let's go and talk to that guru and we'll find out that we do this and everything's going to be okay. Still, the teacher's thoughtfulness is out of the question. It's like someone else has got the solution, got the answer. So although, Leanne, I agree with you that evidence, and I don't mean quantitative data because that's just sanitised, sterilised, homogenised anecdotes. So basically what I'm getting at is really rich qualitative data about what makes a difference for student learning and the full range of outcomes we're after, not just the traditional academic ones, but or literacy, numeracy. It's good to see that actually PISA is changing a lot, so we'll just leave that to the side for a moment, because if PISA actually learns to get their assessment matched with the real range of outcomes we're after, and they're challenged by that at the moment. OECD is doing a lot of work around that, so they're attempting to go there. So when we can see, so what I'm really getting is we've got to keep the thoughtfulness there and remove the barriers that teachers experience. So going back to the curriculum, and I'm sorry I don't know your name from Woodley, should know. Yeah, but basically the point you were making, I don't believe it's the curriculum itself. I think it's the way that we have to, it's put into a linear way of assessing all the outcomes. That's where the issue is, not in the essence of the curriculum itself, if that makes sense. So it's again back to, does the assessment really match the type of learning we're trying to bring out for kids? And anyway, so that's a combination of things. So, but getting away from focusing on practice, because there is no such thing as best practice. In different contexts, the practice I would use shifts depending on so if I'm a responsive educator, what I actually do in a moment has got a lot to do with the nature of the context and the outcomes we're after, not the practice itself. And so if we put and John will have a go back at this, but writing learning intentions on the board, that's not what I'm after. What I'm after is every kid in that learning having a sense of purpose and a sense of agency about their learning. If that's in place, learning will follow and their outcomes will follow. But if it's just, it's the empty practice, I suppose, that I'm reacting to, not what you said in all, Leanne. It's just the fact that... I don't mean it in terms of empty practice, but I think teachers understanding the role that they play through an evidence base is the key to it.
Could I just say one thing about the curriculum issue? You think you got problems now. Wait till the neuroscience starts to creep into the conversation. Because there's now enough evidence in the bank, even though it's barely started to develop, that age grade learning goals are incredibly destructive.
Destructive, you said?
Destructive to learning. And we have built an entire institutional structure on developmental models which are going to be, already are, overturned. I invite you into my online course to just hear Todd Rose and Judy Willis, two people who are teachers and neurologists and neuroscientists, talk about what's happening to our understanding of the structures that we put kids into through institutionalized curriculum and assessment systems. That discussion is going to be bloody because we're going right at the belly of the beast. We better get ready for it. We better get ready with designs that are responsive to what the neuroscientists are now calling the jaggedness problem, which is kids develop erratically in different dimensions at different points, and that we're being pushed by the neuroscience into the end of average. Talk about learning challenges. This is going to be a big one.
Can I just ask a question beyond the standard educational sort of setting? Peter, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Peter's from the Powerhouse Museum, a totally different approach to learning and to teaching and to learning environments in space. Do you want to say anything about what you've heard so far, or?
Thanks, Wes.
It's a pleasure.
Hello. The thing that actually, I could thank Richard, I've got a takeaway actually, and I kind of look forward to the moment when learning evacuates, because museums are a bona fide safe place, I think, for research and learning and, learning from what we already know and innovation and all that stuff. So where the learning is, come to where the learning is, that might be my next t-shirt. The thing that's popped into my mind as we've been talking is a school in Maryland's East Public School in Sydney, sort of central Sydney, near Parramatta, and this school's led by a really fantastic principal, John Go, and he's innovated he's introduced some changes to the way they run the school, and it goes to the idea of, because you put up a timeline, Wes, but I think there's a micro view of that, which is where teachers are time poor. So what John Gow has done is he starts the school day for everybody at 8. First lesson starts at 8. School finishes at 1. The whole community's bought into it. There's after school until normal go home time. There's after school until after school time finishes. And they've all managed to kind of work it out together. And between 1 and 3, the teachers all eat and talk and workshop their ideas and their thinking and build up their, planning and how they're going to work. So there's a lot of, so first of all, it's built into the time that is available for work, that reflection that Julia was talking about, and that opportunity to kind of collaboratively enjoy solving problems and thinking about individual needs. So that's what's popped into my head as we've been having some of the comments here. From the point of view of the museum, we're a little mini institution, and we suffer from having beautiful cultural palace that I work in, with quite high walls and a lot of reasons not to visit, threshold anxiety when you come to the door, and so my small group are working to try to partner with teachers to try to really make the establishment more porous. And you might be aware, if you're in New South Wales, that the government said we want to move this museum to Parramatta, and there's a brand new multi-storey high school being developed next door, pretty much to where the new museum is going to be built. So I'm very excited about the future potential to kind of actually tightly integrate into a school setting.
This whole concept, what is teaching, what is learning, and the settings within it happens. It's a conversation that's going to happen all day today. Ben is going to host a session towards the end of the day, after the lunch break, where the partner organisations are going to be encouraged to do more of what we're hearing at the moment, and that is feedback into the research plan and the research approach and the research concepts that we've got surrounding this. But I might now pass over to John, who wasn't warned in advance that actually he'd be the last speaker in this little bit of a discussion, but I know that he's up to the task, and he's done well to stay quiet until now, so thank you, John.
I think, listening to this conversation, we need to be very careful about this becoming another religious movement, where we polarise and demonise what's out there, to find a space for collaborating on effective use of innovative learning environments. My new adage is beware of educators with solutions. It's really been a history for the last 200 years of schooling for groups on the margins, which this group is, to find their way into the mainstream of schooling. And quite often they create a problem to do that, which is not necessarily the problem. As I mentioned before, this is now coming to the end of my career. 50 years ago when I started, the first project was in this. This problem has been around for a long time. What keeps me going is that I go into schools a lot and I see an incredible amount of excellence. I see some stunning teachers and some stunning schools. And so I want to upscale success. If this project's about creating a demon out there to find a space, I'm out. There is stunning success. The Canberra program that's on the TV at the moment, I spent a lot of time there in that school last year. You would never say that was optimal learning space. Never. But some dramatically brilliant going on in that school in terms of all the things we're talking about, in terms of the learning, in terms of the nature of the teaching, in terms of the kids being involved. I watched the Darrowby program with the toughest kids in that school, with some stunning stuff going on. And so we need to be careful that we don't come up with these demons, because in those kinds of schools, they have the same curriculum, the same time, the same policies, the same politicians, the same kinds of parents, and often the same kids. The question I want put on the table is, what does a project like this, that has a focus on learning spaces, innovative learning environments, what does it allow for it to be different? What does it allow for what we're doing at the moment to be better and to be captured? And what does it look like in terms of the kind of debate I've been hearing at the moment, but I don't think we're fully grasping, is what would we see are the outcomes of a project like this in terms of the nature of learning? It isn't more of the same. I don't think anyone in the room is here for more of the same. How do we capture that? And it probably is through the nature of the assessments. But please don't tell me that we're not getting some of this exciting learning that we're talking about in some of the most horrific spaces that we've ever seen. The institution is an issue in terms of what it's been serving for 200 years. And I think we've all known it's not going to necessarily serve as we go ahead. I've heard that every year for 50 years. And it's served very well many students. If I was putting my polarisation and demonisation on the table is the nature of what the parents want. They want a little better than what they had. And that's not serving our next generation very well. I'm excited about the project if it is about the learning spaces and what it can do different and how we can make sure over the 4 years that we have that it doesn't stay a religious movement on the outside, but it does become mainstream somehow. Not easy, but my gosh, it's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun. And I think on that note, it's a perfect spot for us to be able to break for some morning tea. When we come back, we're going to now try to transform this type of conversation. And there are tensions here, without any doubt at all. But we have to now move into the notion of the research plan and how we're expecting to put together this project to be able to achieve some of the things that John quite nicely summed up then, etc., but also has come through the conversations here. So thank you for your participation. We will have much, much more participation as the day goes through. You might well be targeted, so keep your brains in action and so you're ready for that comment when it comes. And please enjoy some